And Demetrius is tasked to go to Rhodes and conquer the city. But the Rhodians decide to fight. And what you have is Demetrius, for the next year or so, trying to take the city. Rhodes is fortified. It's got a wall on the land side, and it's got a very fortified series of harbors on the northern parts of the island. And you see Demetrius, he's trying to take the harbor with his ships, he got catapults on his ships. He's got a few of these barges tied together, and he builds these siege towers on barges that he floats into the harbor, which are bigger than the wall in the harbor. So basically, at the top of that siege tower, he'd have like archers and people firing down and on the defenders on the walls, and kind of creating the opportunity for him to land troops in the harbor and to take control of it. But the Rhodians, they fight this, tooth and nail. They send fire ships against these great barges with siege towers on. They're successful. It goes back and forth, back and forth. Demetrius captures a bit of the harbor and holds out there for a long time, but then the Rhodians retake it in a sally. He goes again and again. He then tries to undermine the walls on the land side, and he builds more siege towers on the land side. They try and go against the walls, and every time, like, the Rhodians force them back. There's another occasion right at the end where he's able to get troops into the city, like they're actually able to get through the walls on the land side. And they're some of his best men who have fought their way, and they fight their way into the center of Rhodes. And we have told of the captain's name, a man called Alchemist, and they get almost like to the center of Rhodes, and it's looking really good for Demetrius, but the rest of the attacks fail. And all of a sudden, this elite unit of Demetrius's, which have fought their way all the way to the center, are just surrounded because the rest of the attacks have failed. And the Rhodians then just slaughter them all in the center. The Rhodians have fended off this superpower, this Demetrius the Besieger, and his massive siege contraptions against all of the odds. And that in turn results in one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world being constructed, the Colossus of Rhodes.
This episode of Outliers, I'm speaking with Tristan Hughes. Tristan is a producer and presenter on the hit YouTube channel and website History Hits, where he hosts his own podcast called The Ancients. I was really excited to talk to Tristan because I'm a huge fan of his work. I think he does a great job of making history entertaining. Tristan and I had a great time talking about how he got involved in history, how he got involved in History Hit, and we explored some questions I had on Alexander the Great, his father, and the Successor Wars after Alexander's death. So if you're into the behind the scenes of media production, running a successful YouTube and online channel, and ancient history, this is a great podcast for you to check out. I've linked all of Tristan's socials in the description below. Be sure to check them out. So let's get into it. Well, Tristan, thanks so much for joining, man. I'm a huge fan of all your online history work. And my question is, like, when was it you were introduced to history? And when did you find out it would be a passion of yours?
Well, Kip, thank you very much for the invite. I'm very happy to be here. Well, I guess the earliest memory I can go back to, and the one that my mum always wants me to say, is when she brought me a book of Greek myths. Myths.
Oh, yes.
It's always kind of like the drug which gets you interested in ancient history for so many people. And it was the same with me. And it was a children's book of Greek myths. So, kind of dumbed down a bit, and you're not as much gore as you then realize there is. And let's be honest, lots of other infamous stuff which happens in many of these Greek myths that we won't mention now, but people can learn in their own time. But that got me interested straight away, like Odysseus and all the likes of Greece at the start.
Yeah.
Then, I grew up in the 2000s, and I was a bit of a nerd. I was a computer nerd. I wasn't one of the cool kids at school, but so I played lots of computer games. And one of those games which I really, really loved was Rome Total War.
Yes.
So that was another thing. So, it's a mixture of good books I got when I was young, and then Rome Total War, and then just finding out I had a passion for ancient history and Rome and Greece and military history as well. There was Time Commanders, this big strategy kind of TV show when I was growing up, really good. All of that kind of combined very early on into me, of all subjects at school, history, and then in particular ancient history was the thing that actually I could keep my attention span on long term. Like none of biology, chemistry, or physics. That was such a slog. But history and ancient history, that was another thing entirely.
I love that. And I imagine too, growing up in England, you're surrounded by such exciting history as a young boy, castles and knights and King Arthur. I imagine that has to have some impression too.
You are, and also the fact that there is so much. My mum, dad, and I we used to do long car journeys up to the Highlands of Scotland quite a lot, or wherever. And there would be like audiobooks that we would listen to on those journeys. And there is so much literature out there, based on mythical English or British figures. King Arthur's a good one. There are so many stories, timeless stories that have endured, and there are audiobooks of. I think Our Island Story was one that I listened to very early on with my parents. And yes, you are surrounded by history. I do think sometimes you take that for granted when in the UK. It's one of those where you live somewhere and you hear names like Stonehenge or Hadrian's Wall. I mean, I've got to let you into a secret, kid. I've never actually seen Stonehenge up close. I've never been there because it's always felt it's on my doorstep, and I've never done a project on it yet. But I've never gone there in my spare time because I just know it'll be there sometime I can go and see. I'm more interested in stuff that's less on the tourist trail for going around. But
that's so funny.
Yeah, it's one of those things that sometimes you overlook. It's like when you live in London, you don't go to the main tourist site, Trafalgar and so on. But it is a blessing. There is so much.
That's so funny because I think of you as like this globe. You're like Indiana Jones to me, basically. You do these globe-trotting archaeological adventures and film crews and everything. So that blows my mind. You just haven't been to Hadrian's. That's so funny.
Oh, it's Stonehenge. No, I've done it.
Stonehenge. Sorry.
I've done Hadrian's Wall many times.
Okay.
I could be hung out to dry.
Blasphemy.
Interesting. I'm very lucky and to have a great team around me. And yes, to see, I wouldn't quite call myself an Indiana Jones. I don't think I'm cool enough for that, but I'm cool in my own right. So I take very much pride in that. But you're very kind anyway. I don't think I could pull off the hat, I'm afraid.
Yeah, the bullwhip maybe. Do you how did you get involved with History Hit?
So a mixture of being at the right place at the right time, / making my own opportunity, I guess is the way to put it. I graduated from Edinburgh University 2018 now, so that is 6 years ago. And I knew of History Hit a little before then. History Hit was very much a startup company around that time, set up by Dan Snow, who's a big historian in the UK, British Canadian historian. And he'd set up History Hit, and you kind of a podcast, but also of the very beginnings of it, like an online TV channel, kind of like a Netflix idea where you subscribe and you get lots and hundreds of history documentaries. And that was right at its beginning. And History Hit, its own company, was very much a startup. I knew of it when I was finishing my undergraduate degree, and I was already looking at other companies. I wanted to get into the media and history media, really ideally. And you don't get too many options to do that. But I had in my spare time, I'd worked with a YouTube company, which is quite big now, called Kings and Generals. I'd done a bit of work with them, and I had my own little blog on the side, which wasn't like a very, very popular blog, but it was something that I was doing on the side of my degree, and I really enjoyed pouring hours into it in my spare time. And of course, I was still playing Rome Total War. Naturally, those things don't die.
Just one more turn.
Exactly, just one more thing. I was playing with a friend last night, but I then went back down south, and there was a big history festival going on that summer, and it happens every year near Salisbury. It's called Chalk Valley History Festival, and History Hit were there in one of the tents, and I was just I went there actually to meet a historian friend of mine, to meet up and have a nice chat with him, because he'd been very helpful to me over the past few months or so. But then I saw History Hit. History Hit stand, and I decided rather cockily, just finished university. I felt pretty good in myself, very confident in myself, and just kind of had a bit of a laugh with them, and then kind of jokingly kind of said in passing, "You're my competition." Now, me saying that to them as a guy who literally just had a small blog and a few thousand followers on Facebook or whatever at the time, I was nothing compared to History Hit. However, it was quite funny, and I just thought I'd lead in with that. And then gave them my details in regards if there was an internship coming up, and lo and behold, they remembered me and got in contact, and they asked, when can you start work, which was next week. So I finished my contract at Edinburgh as my lease in the flat I was staying with 3 of my good friends, and so went straight down to London, stayed at my parents' house for about a year or so, and kind of made the commute, about a 2-hour, 1.5 hour commute up to London every day. Yeah, for a year or so, but it was wonderful. It was first as an intern, then I got a full-time job there, and it was very much working my way up in the company from there, and doing everything from selling books, tour with Dan Snow's tour when he had a new book out. We went from theatre to theatre across the UK, to social media, to writing articles, so kind of to being an editor, to marketing, you name it. When you get involved in a startup, when it's very, very early on, and you're actually kind of going from being an intern and then you're kind of given more responsibility as you're there full time, you end up doing here, there, and everything, and you're not being paid much for it, but it's the start of your degree, and you are learning so much because you're seeing how you're seeing the chaos of a brand new startup company in the media world trying something absolutely unlike anything that has happened before, like a history-based kind of TV subscription channel. And the mad rushing early on where you don't have much money and you're basically you've got to release a new documentary every week. What are we going to do? We're going to go down to HMS Victory this week, and we're going to try and get one day's filming, and then in 5 days we're going to try and turn around a 20-30 minute film. And it is absolutely chaos at the start, but we all got through it. So I mean, that was kind of my baptism of fire into History Hit, but I wouldn't have changed it for the world. It was difficult, but that getting through that tough period and being there at the right time to endure that and just kind of keep it was really important to where I've now ended up. And where
have you seen the show The Bear?
The Bear. That's the cook one, isn't it?
It's the cook one, but it's just like the chaos of a kitchen, and they're always like frantically trying to get everything prepared. And I'm just picturing that with like a bunch of history nerds now, frantically trying to get documentaries out, and
people are falling out here, people are falling out there. In a small compact room, you've got a train line right next by you. It's a bit smelly in the corridor as well, and all the time you're just you're focused in. There were days when some of us, well, not actually because we've fallen out or anything like that, but because it was very much do or die, and there was the threat that it was going to completely fold, that we all entered the office, maybe 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning, and none of us would talk to each other for like the whole day. We were just kind of focused in from what we were doing, for most of the day until like 6 o'clock and sometimes later. One person is editing the podcast, Dan Snow's History Hit, when it was just one podcast for History Hit. Another person's editing, the documentary. Another person's trying to keep, the stuff afloat, the marketing. And then I'm there just kind of writing articles or doing social media posts or doing more marketing or kind of doing a check of the documentary to make sure it's okay and uploading it and all that. And it was like a bare bones crew of like 4 people for a good, probably about 6 or 7 months, 5 years ago. It was D-Day 75 when it all around that time, because very quickly, Kip, D-Day, the 75th anniversary of D-Day, so that was 2019, almost was a bit of a lifeline for us, because we really planned for that anniversary, got lots of content out for around that time. And so being able to, and then kind of like worked all our social media channels over time, reaching out, and saw a massive spike then, which was really, really exciting. And that's just one example, but it was one of those things where even after time where it's really difficult to see the rewards coming, and that you're actually kind of getting out of that very difficult patch. When it's your first job as well, and you're so determined as a young, in your early 20s, you have this this bold idea of where you want to get to, and that to get there, the survival of History Hit is an essential part of it. It has to get through this startup phase. Failure is not an option. So when you do finally start to see those great spikes in people subscribing and more money coming in, I can tell you it is like the sigh of relief.
Yeah.
That you could you couldn't audibly feel it, but you could just see it in people's, in their emotions, in the stress going away from their face. You could start to see it even at that early stage. And there would later on be more difficulties, the big one, of course, being COVID. But we still got through them. It was a rocky start, but I wouldn't trade it for anything, because you learn so much in that time as well.
That's so interesting. Did COVID negatively impact History Hit? I would imagine everyone's home watching. I could see it being a mixed reaction. I
think you hit the nail on the head. It was interesting because when COVID began and lockdown began in the UK, with History Hit, you could still work at home and get a lot of work done. And also there were exceptions with who was allowed to go out, in lockdown, for people who are creating media content, for education. So we, in a funny kind of way, sometimes I think I did my first real kind of big TV shoot. I got the opportunity to late in lockdown, was going up to Hadrian's Wall and southern Scotland, like Roman Scotland, and going to these sites and seeing no one else there. and the people are just very happy to talk to you there, because they haven't got as much to do the outreach stuff. And also for podcasts, you've got all these academics now stuck at home that you can reach out to say, would you like to do an interview or stuff like that? And so there was more availability, apart from, of course, absolutely every academic and their dog was writing their own book at that time as well. But it was, so yes. And also right at the start, we had a big influx. It was interesting to see there was a very visible influx in subscribers, because at the start of lockdown, all the newspapers were keen on writing articles about how your children or whoever could still learn, your various educational topics, even at home when you can't go out to school proper. Of course, you'd have the online lessons, but that they can do a bit more. And for history, they always regularly selected History Hit in their articles. So the name History Hit got out there, and you saw lots of people signing up for the free trial, giving it a go, seeing what it's like. And yes, a few, not many, well, that's an overstatement saying not many. Many people did keep their subscription after that first month, but you also then you saw the instant influx, but then you would start seeing a bit of a dip as people left, inevitably, as that month went on. And then there's a bit more panic stations, and how do we kind of stabilize it and make it grow even more? And that was kind of the big thing that we had to solve. And we did, once again. D-Day is always a big one for us. It was very helpful for us. But all of these things really helped. Anniversaries of big events, social media, marketing, the fact that we could work remotely and we could go and film during COVID, it did help us kind of get to that next level. And it was really during lockdown that we did get out of, I think we could fair to say, we got out of that startup phase, got acquired by Little Dot Studios, a big company of social media production and a massive help and instrumental to where we are today. And from there, it was, just going from strength to strength. So it just feels so long ago to talk about now.
That's so funny. Yeah, that acquisition must have been huge for you guys then. Like you said, scrapping by with 5 people to getting acquired is an amazing story.
It was funny. And exactly. Going from a small office in Shoreditch to joining the Little Dot Studios office at first in Whitechapel and now in Shoreditch. The original office was in Southwark, not Shoreditch. This office now in Shoreditch. And being part of a bigger team where it's not 5 people, you could get over 100 people in the office in one day. Most of them are also in their 20s, very artistic, creative minds. Naturally, you'd expect in like kind of one of these kind of media companies. And we're still quite independent company, but working within Little Dot Studios. So we began hiring more and more people, production managers, more editors, more audio editors, head of audio content and stuff. And then we were able to create new podcasts like The Ancients, which then comes out of that, which is great. So you get all these new opportunities absolutely started springing up, and then you can start seeing, you get those experts in, like fantastic marketing experts, and something that I could never do, or I could do to an extent that we could live above water, that we were kind of treading water. But then like you see these fantastic experts being brought in and how they help history here, just in how professional it looked, and how the quality, how we could start increasing the quality of audio production, TV production, social media, you name it, all of those things. It starts rising and rising and rising, which was great to see.
That's awesome. Yeah, in the early days, any content creator would know it's a pull and take between quality and quantity. Like, you just want to get stuff out there, and how much time can I spend making this as best as it can? So I can imagine more hands on deck is just so helpful. Could you tell me about your Ancients podcast? You probably started that around the same time too, right? 2020?
Yeah. So I've been working at the company for a year and a half or so, and I've still got this email somewhere. It was at the start of lockdown, and we'd been taken over by Little Dot, so it was very exciting times. And I just decided to send an email to our marketing director, James Carson at the time, basically saying, look, so we got Dan Snow's History Hit podcast, which, if you don't know, it's like an overarching history podcast, 30-minute or 40-minute interviews with an expert on an area of history ranging from the Cold War all back to ancient Rome or Neanderthals. So Dan does have a very wide berth of history, give you a taster of a particular topic. And was always more interested in ancient history. I love doing ancient history, and I got it down their throats how much I loved ancient history in that last.
So what's the distinction between history and ancient history?
Okay, so I would say ancient history ends, it's always very, it's no fine line, but I would always normally say about 500 AD is when you get the beginning of the medieval period, the early Middle Ages, following the end of the Western Roman Empire, if you were thinking of it in a European mindset. But, it is a bit malleable. Like, we have done episodes on things up to 1000 AD. We did one on the early Inuits very recently, and I just thought that was fascinating, wanted to do it. So, there's no firm line for me on it, but if we want to give a date, I'd say around 500 AD, and then all the 4.5 billion years of history on Earth.
Yeah,
prehistory, we should probably say.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my remit, which is great, and I love that. But basically, I sent an email to the boss saying, we've got Dan's podcast, the main one. I really would like to do an ancient history podcast because I don't really see any big competitors for it where it is just kind of all ancient history and prehistory in the format of every week interviewing an expert on a particular topic and then next week doing another one. And they said, go for it. They said, give it 30 episodes. Here's an image that you can use for it. You've got lockdown now. See how many episodes you can record in lockdown. And then in a few months' time, we started editing them. And it was slow growth at first. There was no kind of big... Dan tried to give me a little bit of help when he could. And we had one page, but it wasn't that active. But it did help a little bit at the start. And, the numbers for the first few weeks and months was barely, kind of tens and maybe getting into the hundreds. And then you see the first spike. You start getting addicted to analytics and stats. And then you see like your previous episode on the rise of Constantine has had 20 more people than the one before that for the first day. And you get really excited at the time because you're just like, oh my God, we're going up. The star's the limit. Or the sky's the limit. Maybe the star's the limit as well. But yes, and then we, here I am more than 4.5 years later from that first episode being dropped in June 2020 on the Plague of Athens with my former professor and good friend, Alistair Blanchard from the University of Queensland in Brisbane, Australia. That was another thing. It was calling up a lot of favors from people I knew in the ancient history world for the first few episodes, but it worked a treat. Now we are one of the, if not the leading ancient history podcast in the English speaking world. And we cover topics all stretching from this week we've done the ancient Amazon and prehistoric Japan, but we also do stuff on like lots of Roman history, Greek history. We did Petra, Teutoburg Forest, North America. It's a joy. 2 episodes every week, and long may it continue. I've got a brilliant team now as well.
That's so exciting. How does that process work for you? Like, could you walk me through from does it start with the title of the episode, an area you're interested in, and then you find someone? How does that whole process work?
So, not to give too much away, so we've got a team now, got an ancients team. So we have myself as the presenter, but also a producer as well. We've got our senior producer, Anne-Marie Luff. We've got assistant producer, Joseph Knight, and we've got our main editor, the hero, that is Aidan Lonergan. And every 2 weeks we have a meeting, normally a 1-hour meeting. Almost always these meetings overrun because we always have so many ideas, which is fantastic. And I love them.
Yeah.
And we'll be planning like 2 or 3 months ahead. And we'll be looking, first of all, we'll be thinking about big anniversaries in the calendar, big topics that we can do by looking at the research of what really hits with our audience. Like, for instance, Babylon. Babylon is a big one with our audience, and fall of civilizations as well. So can we do something like the fall of Babylon or something like that? We look at listener suggestions. Listeners very often, they send it to my personal social media like Instagram. They send me a message saying what episode they'd like to hear in the future, and we put them down and we start thinking about which listener suggestions we could include in the next batch. And once in a while we get the listener who suggested it, if they'd like to send in a voice note at the beginning of the episode, kind of saying why they wanted this topic, just to give something back and, show kind of, this is a community at the end of the day, and people who listen to the ancients are the ones who make this show as successful as it is and let us continue, at least in my opinion, my dream of, for as long as possible, sharing these amazing stories with as many people as possible. And so we'll decide on a few topics. We'll make sure we have a nice diverse range as well. So you'll get your Rome, you'll get your Greece in there, you'll get an Ice Age one or early human one or prehistoric episodes there. You know, topics you know you'll sell, but topics you know you'll sell, but over a wide range of different topics. And sometimes there'll be new research that has just come out that you'll be like, oh, I'd like to get the expert on to talk about that. For instance, maybe new research. There was, you know, there's the ancient Amazon is a great example. There was research coming out saying all these new ancient cities discovered in the Amazon rainforest in one of the river valleys, which is really amazing stuff. So focus.
It's always funny seeing like breaking news for
like
a 3,000-year-old thing, you know. Like,
and like,
I love it.
You know, Pompeii is a great example. You always see like in the news, you know, new groundbreaking discoveries from Pompeii like 3 times every year. Although, I'm pretty sure the Pompeii team plan it out so that maybe the news will disappear. Pompeii news will word about Pompeii will disappear from the news for a little bit of time, and then Pompeii will, oh, by the way, we also found this incredible thing. You know, they've probably got hundreds of those in the can, so that once again it takes the leading spots on news channels because Pompeii sells, and Pompeii's amazing discoveries sell because they are so incredible. So yes, we look at news stories, we look at analytics of what's happened, what's done well in the past, and then we make a decision of episodes we want to do, and we start looking for experts. We like looking at YouTube for lectures of particular professors or doctors that up because we want to know if they're good speakers. But at the same time, we also, you know, the Ancients has now done more than 500, maybe more than 600 episodes now, which is amazing. Yeah. But we look, you know, at guests we've had in the past, brilliant guests we've had in the past, and we can invite them back on. That doesn't worry us at all. If they're fantastic speakers and they can talk about something else, we want them back. You know, they are just wonderful. So we get some regular popular guests coming on and returning, and we always take notes of which guests people really like if we get particular things. But yeah, so there is a whole thought process between what topics to do. So yes, based on popularity, but also ensuring that we have a nice wide range of stuff as well. And we used to have this motto of like, you know, come for ancient Rome, stay for the Polynesians, or come for Iron Age Britain or Roman Britain, or come for Alexander the Great or Julius Caesar. Stay for Vietnam 2,000 years ago, Vietnam or prehistoric Japan or something like that, you know, or the knot culture of Nigeria or South American civilization. So that kind of thing, that little balance. So you have those big known civilizations and people, but you also have more elusive, mysterious topics and types that still get people interested. Like we said, we've done the Inuit, we've done the Amazon and prehistoric Japan, all in the last 2 weeks, and all have been really popular. It's wonderful to see.
That's awesome. I love thinking about your guys' development of a history pipeline in that way. Then, like, okay, you can enter here, but we need to move you. We can move you along here, and you can be introduced to so many more areas of interest along the way.
The diversity is actually what I love the most about my job. It's the fact that, you know, one day I'll be learning about Neanderthal Britain. The next day I'll be at the British Museum or whatever, learning about gladiators in Roman Britain. The day after that, I'll be learning about the ancient Greeks and their colonies in southern Italy before the Romans take over that part of the world. Then after that, I've got an interview learning about ancient India and their interactions with the Mediterranean world and the Roman Empire, but also with Southeast Asia. And then after that, it'd be China or South America, or the first humans to reach North America across the Bering Land Bridge, you know, and woolly mammoths or dinosaurs.
Was there an area of history you didn't know a lot about before this podcast that you're now like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I wasn't researching this pre-2020?
Almost all of it, apart from the
really,
anything outside of Rome and Greece. Like for me, I mean, even Egypt, I didn't really know that much about. And so my new area, like when studying, was the Roman Empire and about the successors and the Hellenistic period. But stuff like, Mesopotamia is a great example. I barely knew anything about like the Babylonians or the Sumerians or the Akkadians, even New Kingdom Egypt. And another one is Old Testament stories, which have a basis of, or just biblical stories that have a historical basis to them, at least a loose one, like names that you've heard of from the Bible but don't know too much about. King Herod is that story blows my mind. The Tower of Babel, based on a big tower in Babylon. There are so many of those stories that, I mean, Jericho, isn't that, you know, the actual story of Jericho and the archaeology of Jericho. Is
there archaeology for Jericho?
There's a real site called Jericho, and the archaeology of Jericho spends back 10,000 years.
I had no
And
idea.
yeah, it's incredible. Like learning more about all of that stuff is astonishing. And actually, that was the first thing when I was doing my early episodes of the ancients. It was kind of Rome and Greece, and then spanning out a bit. I just said, okay, let's do a Maya one now. Okay, let's do one about the people who lived in the Sahara. That it was basically finding these experts, or stumbling upon these experts from social media or from press releases that I got emailed. And then we're just like, oh, that sounds really cool. I would like to learn more about that.
Yeah,
So
right.
that, for me, it's more like if I hear something that's cool, I'm just like, okay, we can turn that into a sexy title as well.
Yeah.
I want to do that. That sounds
Yep.
really interesting. Let's do it, kind of thing.
Oh, that's awesome. And it probably makes it easy for you in some ways. Like, I must imagine if you weren't working there, you would be listening to this podcast. Like, you're an audience for it, you know, so you can lend an interesting insight for it.
Yeah, I'd be too jealous of the person who was doing it. I'd be like, oh, yeah. But yeah, absolutely.
Are you good to talk, Alexander?
I can talk Alexander if you want. Yeah, come on then.
Okay. I would just love to know if you think he's appropriately titled the Great.
Oh, God, the big question. And, you know, I always find it difficult to answer this question. Right, well, let's say the bad things first of all, and then we can end on the good things. Bad things, he killed thousands, tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands.
Yeah,
true. He was a megalomaniac by the time he died. You know, and the plans that he supposedly set out when he died were absolutely monstrous and probably would not have been able to be completed. So you do see that this man at the end of the day is a great tyrant. He wasn't afraid of killing former friends or people he thought. He's got good paranoia in him as well, so people he thinks is a threat to his rule. So in all of that regard, is Alexander the Great, is he a good person? Absolutely not. You're not in that regard at all. You wouldn't want to have a chat with him because you probably end up with your head cut off by the end if you defended him or something like that. But you know, he was great in his military conquests, absolutely incredibly significant in the whole shaping of the Hellenistic world that follows afterwards with the great successor kingdoms that come, and also in regards to legacy. I don't think there are many, if any, other historical figures that have a larger legacy than Alexander the Great and what he does. You know, one of the most well-known names in the whole of history, and also before the invention of like the printing press and all of that in the medieval period, you know, kind of the romantic stories of Alexander, like these Arthurian legends that develop, all of these fictional stories that emerge surrounding this figure and his great adventures all the way to India, battling weird mythical creatures. One account has him flying in a very early flying contraption, soaring above the skies. Another has him go to the bottom of a lake or a sea in a very primitive submarine. Yes, you heard that right.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
I had no idea.
They're called the Alexander romances, and there's so many different versions. It's these different countries trying to embrace Alexander. I think there's even a Christian Alexander too, and a Jewish Alexander, a story where apparently he went to Jerusalem and he got circumcised and converted to Judaism. So you get these different fictional stories of Alexander emerging, and by the medieval period, they are Arthurian bestsellers. They are medieval bestsellers, these Arthurian stories of Alexander the Great. So, like, you know, in so many different ways, Greek language as well, you know, he is incredibly significant. And I guess in that way you can say great. And if you're talking about all the people who are called the Great in ancient history, I think, you know, he is probably one of the few where you can say, yeah, probably is. You give him the Great. On a personal level, as a person, and speaking with Christian moral ethics, I mean, he was a horrible person.
Right.
But it's always a complicated question. And I must admit, whenever anyone asks me, was he great? I kind of squirm inside because it tests me a little bit, I must admit, to try and get my thoughts across well.
Well, then maybe this isn't the best follow-up, but do you think there's a case to be made that what his father accomplished, uniting Greece, was more impressive than what he did, conquering Persia?
I love this question. I really love this question because, you know, Philip II of Macedon is someone who is always kind of overlooked compared to Alexander the Great. Because it's Alexander, he always takes the limelight. And also the successors, which I think is even more interesting than Alexander, the limelight is also taken away from them because of Alexander the Great. But Philip, he is the person who lays the foundations for Alexander to become as great.
He's like a Nepo baby almost.
Yeah. Alexander the Nepo baby. I've never heard that one. You know, he lays the foundations. He transforms the kingdom of Macedon, which, you know, last 100 years or so, Greek cities further south, let's say Athens, Sparta, Corinth, you know, the people who think they're right at the center of the civilized Greek world, they look at Macedon further north, this kingdom, which has a king as well, which is very different to, let's say, Athens and democracy and the times before, they look at that kingdom and think it's very much on the periphery and almost semi-barbarous because it neighbors barbarians, and they kind of derided the dialect, the Macedonian dialect, Greek dialect, as kind of being like more rough around the edges, and they kind of like took the piss out of Macedonians a bit because of that. And I always use an example of, let's say my accent, I grew up in the home counties, and I would never do this, but you do see sometimes some people making fun of accent, like people from Glasgow or whatever, or just because they have a rougher dialect English, and it's a different dialect. And and Scots would take the piss out of English people from Southern England. Oh, look, they've got such a posh accents and stuff like that.
So this be like a deep South accent for American.
Well, you see it time and time again, and I think it was the same with the dialects in the Macedonians, the Athenians kind of thing. So for a long time, Macedon was seen as a backwater, and by the time that Philip took the throne, Macedon was basically on the brink of collapse. The last king had been killed in battle, and his army had been destroyed by neighboring, in their eyes, barbarians, Thracians and Illyrians and so on, who lived in like the Balkans and Bulgaria area today. But he reforms the army. He improves the financial basis, increases the coffers of the Kingdom of Macedon, and he creates the army that will take over in Philip's lifetime, become the dominant force on the Greek mainland, extending all the way up towards the Danube River, modern-day Romania way, and all the way down into what is the Peloponnese in southern Greece today, and west into southern Albania and southwest Greece, with the army that when Philip dies, he's assassinated, Alexander inherits a fantastic army, the best, most professional and battle-hardened army of the time in the central Mediterranean. He's got quite a lot, he's got a bit of money, thanks to his dad, and he has all of these kind of subjugated areas too, and basically the foundations for him to try and see how much he can conquer of the western fringes, probably at first just the western fringes, and then when he wins those early successes, he then thinks, actually, how much of the Persian Empire can I conquer?
Yeah. Did Philip develop the Phalanx?
Yes, well, I mean, the Phalanx is, Phalanx is kind of a wall of spears. That's been in existence for hundreds and hundreds of years before Philip. What Philip does is he kind of revolutionizes the design. He kind of, it looks like he's inspired by other, Greek generals who come before him, who had experimented with a phalanx of, of armored infantrymen with a shield and a spear, fighting in close-knit formations, which the ancient Greeks had been doing for centuries by that point, like hoplite warfare. And he's seen certain Greek generals, I think particularly a man called Iphicrates, experiment with a few of them having smaller shields, lighter armor, and longer spears, and kind of testing that kind of longer reach of spears.
Yeah.
And so trying in that regard, and then he takes that to the next level. I think he also sees another Greek general or Greek generals, I think it's like Epaminondas and Pelopidas, these Theban generals who fight the Spartans. They sees them, or maybe, I think it's up for debate, have like bigger depth in their phalanxes as well. So bigger depth and punching through. And it seems that these inspirations that Philip sees, I don't think he definitely doesn't conjure it up in the spot, but he creates this kind of new phalanx type, the Macedonian phalanx, hence why it's called, where his troops are trained in over 100 men battalion formations. I think 128 men is the lowest kind of number of soldiers in one. But each soldier has a 6-meter long pike, and you have like an iron tip on the top, and you have a bronze or iron butt, a counter spike on the bottom, and you hold it with 2 hands, probably about a quarter of the way up the pike. So you're near the butt spike of it as well. And so this soldier doesn't have too much armor. He's not heavily armed. I think he's got like a leather cuirass on, and he's got a helmet, some greaves, and he has a small shield called a pelter. And because with hoplites, older hoplites, like Athenian Spartan hoplites, where your spear is only 2 meters tall, a doru, you have a large shield as well, which you have in your other hand, and you hold that shield with your other hand, bigger shield, a hoplon or an aspis. What he does, so he puts the spears up to 6 meters long, a pike in one hand, and because you have to use both hands for the holding the pike, you have a smaller shield. He gives the soldiers a smaller shield called a pelter, which doesn't cover as much, but kind of covers enough, like to kind of protect like this part of the body. And at the same time, they're holding the spear, they're holding the pike with two hands. Now, one of those soldiers on their own isn't going to be very effective. They got a long pike, they got a sword, but still dropping the pike and getting the sword out as well. And your shield is fumbling on your arm all the time. It's not going to be the easiest. But now imagine one of those figures in a formation that you have 7 people to your side. So let's say you've got 3 on one side, you've got 4 on another. So you've got a nice row of them now, and then they lower their pikes towards you. So now you've got a wall of spears. Now imagine that going 16 ranks deep. You've got like 8 along the front, right? And every one of you has got a 6-meter long pike. So then you've got people behind you and behind you and behind you and behind you. You've all got a pike. And what the Phalanx formation did was that to kind of become, think of it almost like a hedgehog or a porcupine. You would, if you're on the front row, you would lower your spear down, your pike down, your sarissa. It was called a sarissa, the 6-meter long pike. You'd lower it down 90 degrees, facing the enemy, iron tip pointed out 6 meters ahead. You would then notice, you would feel it probably as I haven't done this, I'd love to do this one day with a recreation, like in the Alexander 2004 epic movie, when they have the battle scene at the beginning. You would probably feel, or you would hear like the wind kind of change in temperature, like another spear, or maybe 2 or 3 spears going down behind you to your right, in the space between you and the figure to your right, let's say. And that is because you've put the first row of spears down. The person in the second rank has put his Slayer spear down as well. So that spear is poking out next to you, but not reaching just as far as yours. The third rank has then put their spears 90 degrees down as well. So you can probably see that one still as well, because that's 6 meters, and you probably have got more than 6 meters between the first man and the third man. You're quite compact. And then the fourth person, probably maybe that has also got their pike down, or has started having it maybe, let's say, a 10-degree angle or a 20-degree angle. So it's now starting to go upwards a bit. Then maybe the fifth row, you might just see the tip of the 5th sarissa spear, or maybe just past the tip, is a bit further, maybe like 45 degrees angle up or 35 degrees angle. The 6th spear, you maybe just be able to see the little bit out of the corner of your eye, a bit further up, and it keeps going up and up and up all the way back to the 16th row, where the people right back on the 16th row have their pikes all the way up. So it's just, if you can imagine that along the 8-man row kind of thing, it's an incredibly interesting formation, extraordinary formation to pull off. But then you just have, for someone trying to attack this from the front, okay, you get past the first pike. Then you've got, like a foot later, the next pike.
Yeah, 2 through 6 coming at you.
Then you've got another one poking at you. And then you've got the 4th one, which is now kind of going at your chest. And then maybe a 5th one, which is aimed at your face. And you've got to get through those 5 layers before you actually get to the front rank of the guy whose pike you'd have passed probably like ages before. Like, it is a big, big task. And it's a type of warfare that, continues into the 17th, 18th centuries. Pikemen, rows of pikemen like that continue into use by European armies. I think maybe a battle like Rocroi, just or goes straight to my mind, where you have like these pikemen and English Civil War and all that. It continues. And that is the Macedonian style phalanx.
Wow, what an impact.
Well, what's also interesting is that they're drilled in the discipline and the training, so that like also they can change direction, so they can bring their spears up if they're turned to. They had the signals, they had a bugler, they had messengers like attached to each small unit. So if they would hear the bugle, they would hear a command, or they would see their standard bearer making command. You have the officers, and let's say they want to move, rotate 90 degrees. Spears, pikes go up, turn round, and then whoever's now at the front, might go down, and they know how to do it. Now, even with all that training, Macedonian phalanx is vulnerable. If people are trying to attack on the sides, you still takes a bit of time to move your spear around and get that. And if that phalanx is attacked from the sides, it's not long before that whole formation crumbles as you rush and get your little sword out, because otherwise you just got a little sword and a small shield. You're dust if you got heavily armed.
I can't imagine you're too dexterous with a 20-foot spear.
You have to drop it. And then the formation crumbles. And that is why the other part of another part of it is that you had lots of light infantry kind of covering the flanks. And you had people with smaller spears, like normally the high pacifists or allied units that would have been covering the flanks to make sure that people didn't get around. Any of the cavalry as well, this heavy shot cavalry, which would have been on the far flanks. And they're really there to protect the phalanx in the center and ensure that people can't get round, because the phalanx is almost impregnable from the front. But if you get round the sides of it and you deal with those units covering those flanks, they're in trouble. They are very much in trouble.
Do these tactics largely remain the same when it's the Successor Wars and it's Macedonian versus Macedonian, or are they incorporating other tactics they picked up from their wars in Persia? How does that work?
To an extent, yes, but there is always evolution and development, especially as you're trying to build an army. As you say, if you have a Macedonian phalanx in one army and another Macedonian phalanx in the other. Of course, with the Successor Wars, it said this is following the conquest of the Persian Empire. You've got many Persian units in there. The Persians have very good cavalry and very good archers as well, which can be definitely used to help kind of puncture that main line. But phalanxes do, by and large, still stay the mainstay for armies of the Successor periods. What you see, though, is that they don't just become Macedonian soldiers. Although like the highest renowned phalanx troops following Alexander the Great's death, there's a unit called the Silver Shields, and they're kind of veterans of Alexander the Great's campaigns, very mercenary in their nature, very autonomous. But when they fought against other armies, they basically won every time, because they were so battle hardened after fighting always with Alexander. They would always win, but they were very treacherous at the same time. And ultimately, one commander decides they're too much hassle, too much difficulty. They can't trust them, so he disbands them instead. But yes, by the time of the Successors, you're getting elephants in armies too. You're getting lots of Asian cavalry. You are having to train non-Macedonian, non-Greek troops in the Macedonian phalanx formation. And that becomes, it becomes trained. People are trained in how to fight Macedonian phalanx from across what they would see as Asia, from like Anatolia in Turkey all the way to the Hindu Kush. But you do see in many armies the Macedonian phalanx staying the center. But with the introduction of all these new Asian troops into the army, and especially elephants, there is new ways to try and counter it. Winning the cavalry battles on the flanks are usually vital. If you get the advantage in cavalry or elephants, then you see many cases where the infantry just surrenders. And in that case, they just go and join the other general, and swell them with more troops. You see that quite a lot.
Because you probably wouldn't even know what an elephant is, right? Like, would you have a concept of that animal?
Well, many people, especially when they bring them to Rome. The Romans are the first people that the Romans see with elephants. It's not Hannibal. It's actually one of the successors of Alexander the Great, who's bringing an army with Macedonian phalanx and cavalry, but also elephants, Indian elephants, into southern Italy, a man called Pyrrhus.
Wow.
But yeah, most of them wouldn't have seen an elephant. They are a luxury animal for many of these kings and warlords. Their effectiveness in battle is, you can't count on it all the time. But there is certain examples of them working really well, very good against cavalry. One of the biggest battles that occurs after Alexander's death in 301 BC, Ipsus, one of the key moves in that battle is when one of the winning generals on the side is able to block off the returning cavalry of their opponent from coming back to the battlefield, because they put elephants in the path and they can't get past the elephants, and the horses won't attack them either. So it is those developing tactics, especially when you're not fighting the Persians, when you're not fighting Indian kings or any of that, when you're fighting other generals who have been taught in the Macedonian manner. And
they know all your tricks.
Well, they know all your tricks, but they too will, by and large, their armies are more mercenaries. You have a central group of pikemen and heavy cavalry, but they will always, in the Successor Wars, you notice afterwards, tens of thousands of mercenaries are used, and they are mercenaries from Asia Minor. They're archers, they're horsemen, they're people from Persia, they're Egyptians. So all trained in their own kind of styles of fighting. They're horse archers. And really, the success depends on how best the general can use all those different types of troops that they've got in their army and use them together.
That's just fascinating. This is why history is so exciting. Can you? That sounds like straight out of an epic fantasy book. All these disparate troops coming together. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is. And the geographic extent of it is, with the Successor Wars, for instance, it's going from India and the Indus River all the way to Macedonia and even southern Italy. So it is a huge geographic area, very diverse armies,
Yeah.
very power-hungry warlords who will stop at nothing to try and become the top dog. The next Alexander.
Will you humor me for a speed round real quick
Yes, of
of
course.
questions? Okay. This first one might be the hardest one. Do you have a favorite ancient battle?
Yes, I do. Initially when I think it's just like, oh God, what am I going to think? What am I going to think?
Okay.
Yes, one of my favorites is the one it's still in the Successor Wars, but it's a fascinating story of David versus Goliath kind of thing. It's the Siege of Rhodes. So Rhodes, an island in the Aegean, so kind of Eastern Aegean, south of modern day Bodrum and Western Turkey, beautiful island. In 305, 306 BC, Rhodes it's an independent city on that island, still powerful trading city as well. It's taking advantage of the fact that kind of the center of the Greek world has transitioned from Greece to being what is today Syria and Egypt, places like Alexandria, later Antioch, all those areas. So you've got lots of trade going along that coastline, and Rhodes is really taking advantage of that, and it's a strong naval power too. One of the big dogs of the time, one of the titanic figures of the Wars of the Successors, arguably, no, he was the most powerful figure of the time, a man called Antigonus the One-Eyed. He controlled much of Alexander's empire, huge army and huge fleet. He has a very capable son called Demetrius the Besieger, and Antigonus basically wants to kind of now look at Europe and Greece and Western Turkey and solidifying his control there too. And one place that he wants taken over as part of that is Rhodes. And Demetrius is tasked to go to Rhodes and conquer the city. And he goes to Rhodes with a huge army and armada, lands the army near the city on the land, and has a huge armada of ships, nothing the Rhodians couldn't compete with it. I mean, in size of quantity, and they're stuck in the harbor. But the Rhodians decide to fight. And what you have is Demetrius, for the next year or so, trying to take the city. Rhodes is fortified. It's got a wall on the land side, and it's got a very fortified series of harbors on the northern parts of the island. And you see Demetrius, he's trying to take the harbor with his ships, he got catapults on his ships. He's got a few of these barges tied together, and he builds these siege towers on barges that he floats into the harbor, which are bigger than the wall in the harbor. So basically, at the top of that siege tower, he'd have like archers and people firing down and on the defenders on the walls, and kind of creating the opportunity for him to land troops in the harbor and to take control of it. But the Rhodians, they fight this, tooth and nail. They send fire ships against these great barges with siege towers on. They're successful. It goes back and forth, back and forth. Demetrius captures a bit of the harbor and holds out there for a long time, but then the Rhodians retake it in a sally. He goes again and again. He then tries to undermine the walls on the land side, and he builds more siege towers on the land side. They try and go against the walls, and every time, like, the Rhodians force them back. There's another occasion right at the end where he's able to get troops into the city, like they're actually able to get through the walls on the land side. And they're some of these best men who have fought their way, and they fight their way into the center of Rhodes. And we have told of the captain's name, a man called Alchemist, and they get almost like to the center of Rhodes, and it's looking really good for Demetrius. But the harbor attack fails, but the rest of the attacks failed. And all of a sudden, this elite unit of Demetrius's, which have fought their way all the way to the center, are just surrounded, because the rest of the attacks have failed. And the Rhodians then just slaughter them all in the center. And that's sometimes seen in Diodorus's account, who's a Greek historian who gives a very detailed account of this. And this was, it deserves to be made into a movie. That is often, it's seen like as a symbol for the end for Demetrius's siege, and they come to peace at the end. And the Rhodians survive.
Wow.
The Rhodians have fended off this superpower, this Demetrius the Besieger, and his massive siege contraptions against all of the odds, being incredible ingenuity of it as well. And that in turn results in one of the seven wonders of the ancient world being constructed, the Colossus of Rhodes. I don't know if the great statue.
Oh, yeah.
See, in Game of Thrones, and you get a copy of it when you have the city of Bravos. And at the entrance, you have a big statue of a man. And that was to their patron god Helios. And they created that statue in the aftermath to celebrate their victory against all odds, against the successor, one of the the superpower of the time. I love that story. It's little known, the Siege of Rhodes, but it deserves to be made a movie out of. It has got everything. It's fantastic.
I'd never heard of that. That's a fascinating story. And you're right, the engineering competence and to overcome a more powerful, better engineered empire, that's incredible.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you wanted a quick fire, but I gave you a long story.
No, that was perfect.
The next one I won't be as long, but but I had to share that one because that is my favorite.
And then just the last question I had was like, what's the best way for people to support and follow you, follow History Hit, your podcast?
Well, the podcast, it's free to listen to on all good podcast platforms. It's on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, Podfollow, all of those. History Hit. You can check us out on our social media. If you're interested in the documentaries, then you can sign up to History Hit TV, subscription-wise, and see the new documentaries that we release every week. And just have a look at History Hit and our great stable of podcasts. I'm there and I'm on social media as well as Ancient Tristan, doing ancient history stuff across the world, and very, very fun to do. We're going to keep going. We're going to keep getting bigger and better, and we'll see what happens next.
I love it. I think it's false to think of education and entertainment as a spectrum. Like, I think you can definitely stack them, and you guys do a great job of that. So thank you for that.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you very much for the time. I'm sorry I couldn't get any climbing puns in.
Thanks so much. That's it for this episode of Outliers. Thanks so much to Tristan for joining, and thank you for listening. Be sure to hit follow, like, subscribe so you stay tuned for the next interview.